Chapter 2. Which envelope should he open first? The lab results or the bill? Michael was paranoid about protection, so the lab results should be good. Should be. In his experience, shit didn't need a reason to happen. Bills, on the other hand, were a sure thing. They always sucked. The only question was how hard they'd punch him in the balls. Tensing his muscles for impact, he tore open the bill. How much was it this month? He scanned to the bottom of the itemized invoice and located the final amount. The breath trickled from his lungs before it gusted out. Not horrible. On the scale of stinging to pulverizing, he'd put this one at merely bruising. That probably meant he'd contracted chlamydia. He set the bill down on top of the metal filing cabinet, nestled behind his kitchen table, and opened the lab results from his latest STD screening. All negative. Thank fuck. It was Friday evening again, which meant he needed to work tonight. Time to get himself in the mindset for fucking. Not an easy thing to do after thinking about STDs and plaguing bills. For an instant, he let himself imagine what things would be like if the bills came to an end. He'd be free at last. He could return to his old life and... Shame doused him. No, he didn't want the bills to end. He never wanted that to happen. Never. As Michael padded through his cheap apartment toward the bathroom and shed his clothes, he tried to revive his old enthusiasm for this job. The taboo nature of it had been enough in the beginning, but after 3 years of escorting, that was pretty much old hat. The revenge aspect still satisfied him, though. Look at your only son now, Dad. It would torment his dad if he found out Michael was having sex for money. A thoroughly delightful thought. Not an arousing one, however. That was what fantasies were for. He mentally sifted through his favorites. What was he in the mood for tonight? Hot for teacher? Neglected housewife? Secret lover? He cranked the shower knob and waited for steam to cloud the air before climbing beneath the hot spray. A breath in, a breath out, and he readied his mind. What was the name of tonight's client again? Shanna? Estelle? No. Stella. He'd bet $20 that wasn't her real name, but whatever. She'd chosen to pay up front. He'd try to do something extra nice for her. Hot for teacher, then. It was his freshman year of college. He skipped all of his lectures but this one because Ms. Stella liked to drop the chalkboard eraser right by his chair. Picturing her skirt riding up as she bent down to retrieve the eraser, he gripped his cock and stroked with firm motions. When class ended, he draped her face down over her desk and bunched her skirt up to her waist to reveal that she wasn't wearing panties. He plunged into her hard and fast. If someone walked in on them... With a groan, he yanked his hand away before he could fly over the edge. He was primed and ready to see Ms. Stella outside of class. He kept his mind locked in the fantasy as he finished with his shower, dried off, and left the bathroom to pull on jeans, a t-shirt, and a black sports coat. A quick look in the half-fogged mirror and 2 swipes of his fingers through his damp hair confirmed he was presentable. Condoms, keys, wallet. Out of habit, he reread the special comments section of tonight's assignment on his phone. Please don't wear cologne. That was easy. He didn't like the stuff in the first place. He slipped his phone into his pocket along with everything else and left his apartment. It wasn't long before he parked in the underground lot of the Clement Hotel. As he strolled into the sleek, ultra-modern lobby, he made sure the lapels of his coat were down and played his usual pre-meet-and-greet game, where he imagined what his new client was like. Under client age for tonight, it had said 30. He sighed and corrected the age to 50. Anything younger than 40 was always a lie, unless it was a group thing, which he didn't do. Bachelorette parties paid well, but the idea of destroying young love depressed the hell out of him. Maybe it was pathetic, but he wanted to live in a world where brides-to-be only had sex with their grooms-to-be and vice versa. Besides, Large groups of horny women were terrifying. You couldn't defend yourself against them, and their nails were sharp. Stella could be a pampered 50 who indulged in sweets, spas, and frou-frou canines, was therefore decadently rounded, and preferred to be worshipped in bed, something Michael had no problem with. She could also be a fit 50 who liked yoga, green juice, and marathon sex sessions that worked his abs better than weighted incline crunches. Or, his least favorite, she could be a hard-ass Asian go-getter who chose him because, with his mixed Vietnamese and Swedish heritage, he looked a lot like the K-drama star Daniel Henney. This last kind of woman inevitably reminded him of his mom, and after sleeping with them, he needed therapy with a punching bag. Entering the hotel restaurant, he searched the dimly lit tables for a brown-haired, brown-eyed woman wearing glasses. Because he'd gotten through his mail without major incident earlier, he braced himself for the worst now. His gaze skipped over tables occupied by businessmen until he saw a solitary, middle-aged Asian woman micromanaging the waitress on how to make her salad. When she brushed manicured nails through her lightened brown hair, his stomach sank, and he began walking toward her. It was going to be a long night. No. This was the culmination of a semester's worth of sexual tension. They both wanted this. He wanted this. Before he could reach her, a reed-thin older man took the seat opposite her and covered her hand with his. Confused but relieved, Michael stepped back and surveyed the restaurant again. No one was sitting alone, but for a girl in the far corner. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and sexy librarian-type glasses were balanced on a cute little nose. In fact, from what he could see of her, everything looked like it had been chosen from a sexy librarian cosplay. She wore neat pointed pumps, a gray pencil skirt, and a fitted white Oxford shirt buttoned clear up to her throat. It was possible she was 30, but Michael put her at 25. There was something young and wholesome about her, though her frown was rather fierce as she scrutinized the menu. Michael glanced about the room, searching for a hidden camera team, or his friends cracking up behind the potted plants. He found neither of those things. He closed his hands around the back of the chair across from her. "Excuse me, are you Stella?" Her eyes shot to his face, and Michael lost his train of thought. Those sexy librarian glasses showcased the most stunning pair of soft brown eyes, and her lips. They were just full enough to be tempting without detracting from her overall air of sweetness. "I'm sorry. I must have the wrong person," he said with a smile he hoped was more apologetic and less embarrassed. There was no way a girl like this had hired an escort. She blinked and jostled the table as she flew to her feet. "No, that's me. You're Michael. I recognize you from your picture." She stuck her hand out. "I'm Stella Lane. Nice to meet you." He stared at her open expression and proffered hand for a stunned fraction of a second. This wasn't how clients greeted him. They usually waved him into a seat with a sly curl of their lips and a sparkle in their eyes. That sparkle that said they thought they were better than him but were looking forward to what he could offer anyway. She greeted him like he was an equal. Quickly recovering from his surprise, he wrapped her slender hand in his and shook it. "Michael Phan. Nice to meet you, too." When he released her, she motioned toward his chair awkwardly. "Please, have a seat." He sat and watched as she perched herself on the precarious edge of her seat, her back straight as a board. She searched his face, but when he arched an eyebrow at her, she switched her focus to the menu. She adjusted the position of her glasses with a wrinkle of her nose. "Are you hungry?" "I am." Her knuckles went wide as she clung to the menu. "The salmon is good here, and the steak. My dad likes the lamb." Her gaze jumped to his face, and even in the dim light, he could see her cheeks go crimson. She cleared her throat. "Maybe not the lamb." Because he couldn't resist, he asked, "Why not the lamb?" "I think it tastes woolly, and when we..." She stared up at the ceiling and took a deep breath. All I'd be thinking about would be sheep and lambs and wool. Understood, he said with a grin. When she stared at his mouth like she couldn't remember what she was going to say, his grin widened. Women chose him because they liked the way he looked. Few of them responded to him like this, however. It was flattering even as it was funny. Are there any things you would prefer I not eat or drink? She asked. No, I'm pretty easy. He kept his voice light and tried to ignore the tightness in his chest. It had to be heartburn. Simple thoughtfulness wasn't doing this to him. After the waitress took their order and left, Stella sipped from her water glass and drew geometrical shapes in the condensation with delicate fingertips. When she noticed him watching her, she drew her hand back and sat on it, flushing like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. Something about that was kind of endearing. If she hadn't already paid, he wouldn't believe she actually wanted this. Why did she want this? She should have a boyfriend. Or a husband. Against his better judgment, it was best when he didn't know. He looked at her left hand resting on the table. No ring, no white line. I have a proposition for you, she said suddenly, pinning him with a gaze that was surprisingly direct. It would require a commitment of sorts for the next couple months, I imagine. I would prefer to have sole access to you during that time, if you're available. What do you have in mind? Please tell me if you're available first. I only do Friday nights. That was non-negotiable. Escorting once a week was bad enough. If he had to do it more than that, he'd lose his fucking mind, and he couldn't afford for that to happen. Too many people depended on him. He never scheduled repeat appointments with the same client either. They tended to get attached, and he couldn't stand that. But he wanted to hear what she was proposing before he declined. You have the next few months open, then? She asked. It depends on what you're proposing. She pushed her glasses up her nose and drew her shoulders back. I'm awful at what you do, but I want to get better. I think I can get better if someone would teach me. I'd like that person to be you. Understanding splashed over Michael in surreal waves. She thought she was bad at sex and wanted lessons to improve. She wanted him to tutor her. How the hell did you teach sex? I think we should do a trial run before we set anything up, Michael hedged. She couldn't actually be bad at sex, and she'd already paid. At the very least, he had to give her tonight. Frowning, she nodded. You're absolutely right. We should establish a baseline. A grin tugged at his lips again. Are you a scientist, Stella? Oh, no. I'm an economist. More precisely, I'm an econometrician. In Michael's book, that put her solidly in the brainiac category, and an odd feeling ghosted up the back of his neck. Damned if he didn't have a thing for smart girls. There was a reason why his favorite fantasy was hot for teacher. I don't know what that is. I use statistics and calculus to model economic systems. Do you know how, when you buy something online, they usually email you with future recommendations? I help them formulate those recommendations. It's a very fluid and fascinating field right now. As she spoke, she leaned toward him and her eyes lit with excitement. Her lips curved like she was telling him a secret about math things. Today's material is completely different from what I used to teach when I was in graduate school. That odd feeling simmering up Michael's spine increased in intensity. She'd somehow gotten prettier during the course of their discussion. Brown eyes and thick lashes, pouty lips, delicate jaw, vulnerable neck. Vivid images of him unfastening the buttons of her shirt flashed in his mind. But unlike the usual, he didn't want to do it quickly. He didn't want to skip straight to the fucking, get out, and go home. This girl was different. It was that spark in her eyes. He wanted to take his time and see if he could make her shine with a different kind of excitement. His cock dug at the fly of his jeans, dragging Michael back to the here and now. His skin had gone hot and sensitive, and his pulse thrummed with eagerness. He hadn't been this turned on in forever, and he hadn't been fantasizing she was someone else. He reminded himself this was business. His personal wants and needs didn't play into this at all. This assignment was just like any other, and when it was done, he'd move on to the next. He took a deep breath and said the first thing he could think of. "Were you on the math team in high school?" She laughed down at her water. "No." "Science club?" "Maybe it was chess club." No and no. Her smile was a sad, barely there thing that made him wonder what high school had been like for her. Looking back up at him, she said, "Let me guess. Football quarterback?" "Nope. My dad was a firm believer that sports are stupid." Her brow wrinkled with a little frown. "I find that difficult to believe. You're very athletic-looking." He only encouraged practical things, like self-defense. He hated to agree with his dad on anything, but with the family business being what it was, and his helping out with it, the techniques had come in handy when shit kids teased him. A discovering kind of smile lit her face. "What do you do? MMA, Kung Fu, Jeet Kune Do?" "I've done a little of everything. Why do you sound like you actually know what you're talking about?" Her gaze dropped back down to her water. "I like martial arts movies, and things like that." He groaned as suspicion dawned. "Don't tell me. You're a Korean drama fan." She tilted her head as a smile peeked over her lips. "Yes." "I do not look like Daniel Henney." "No. You look better." He settled his hands on the edge of the table as his face heated. Fuck. He was blushing. What the hell kind of escort blushed? His sisters had posters of Henny plastered all over their bedroom walls, had even established a man beauty scale of 1 to Henny. They'd agreed among themselves that Michael was a solid 8. He didn't give a damn where he ranked, but it meant something that this genius girl gave him an 11. Their dinner arrived, saving him from having to respond to her compliment. She'd ordered the salmon, so he'd done the same. No way was he going to eat lamb. He snorted to himself. Woolly. His fish was good, so he ate all of it. He suspected everything was good here. The Clement was one of Palo Alto's most exclusive hotels, with rooms going for more than $1,000 a night. Apparently, econometricians made shitloads of money. As he watched Stella pick at her dinner, however, he noticed that everything about her was understated. Her face was devoid of makeup, her nails were short and unpainted, and her clothes were simple, though they fit her perfectly. They had to be custom-made. When she set her fork down and wiped her mouth, her salmon was only half finished. If they'd known each other better, he would have eaten it for her. His grandma always made him finish his dinner down to the last grain of rice. "Is that all you're going to eat?" "I'm nervous," she admitted. "You don't need to be." He was a damned good escort, and he'd take care of her. Unlike most of his assignments, he even looked forward to it. "I know. I can't help it. Could we just get this over with?" His eyebrows twitched. He'd never heard someone say something like that in reference to a night with him. Changing her mindset was going to be fun. All right. He draped his napkin over his empty dinner plate and got to his feet. "Let's go to your room."